Hello, everyone. My name is Luna, and this is my learning story. For starters, I want to talk about where I grew up and where I was educated. I attended public schools in Salinas, California, and this is the only place that I attended school. I attended elementary, middle, and high school here. And one important note I want to make about Salinas is it's primarily an agricultural community. It's still pretty urban, but a lot of our workforce has a connection to the agricultural economy, particularly many of them are field workers. So it's just an important note of context for where I grew up. Additionally, one of the joys of being educated here in Salinas was a close connection to my culture. A lot of the people in Salinas are Hispanic and Latinx immigrants, which I am myself, children of immigrants. So I always had a really close connection to my culture as a result. A lot of the people around me had like similar backgrounds and experiences. However, a challenge of being educated in Salinas was it's a very like expensive district to live in, especially in terms of housing. So consequence of this was a really high turnover rate. In the 4 years of high school that I had three different principals. And this was also reflected in terms of like teachers. A lot of them would only stay for a year or two and then move on to better paying jobs or somewhere that was less expensive. And now I want to talk a little bit about student demographics. So I focus primarily on my high school because I feel like it reflected all of my K through 12 experiences pretty accurately. And my high school was overwhelmingly Hispanic or Latino, which was the reality for most of the high schools here in Salinas. We had white and Filipino students, but by and large, Hispanic and Latino was the main demographic. My high school was also really large in terms of student size. We had almost 3,000 students, and the majority of them were considered socioeconomically disadvantaged and also qualified for free and reduced price meals. Additionally, most of them were classified as English proficient, but many of them were also still English learners. Um, Another important tidbit I want to share is that of my graduating class, only 50% of us actually met UC or CSU course requirements. In terms of staff demographics, I didn't find any like specific images that represented this, but from what I remember, almost the majority of my teachers were white, specifically the teachers in any of my AP classes or for college prep programs, all of my teachers were white. Additionally, 15% of our teachers were considered inexperienced and 13% chronically absent. In terms of teacher salaries, the average teacher salary for my district was considerably lower than it was for the average high school district. And now this brings me to chapter 3, some of the family influences. As I mentioned, I come from a Latinx immigrant background. Both of my parents immigrated from Jalisco, Mexico when they were adults, and they specifically helped to instill in me a love of literature. They always encouraged me to like read books and were really just really encouraged me. Uh, they were always like willing and able to buy me books whenever I like was interested in new ones. I think this really set me up well, like academically, or to do well academically because of this encouragement. And overall, my parents were really encouraged of me academically. They both worked very physically demanding jobs and consistently said to me as I was growing up that the way to move forward in life was like through a college education. This was how I could like achieve more job security and more financial stability so I didn't have to go through the same experiences that my parents did. Some of the messages that I received throughout my K through 12 was this idea of a meritocracy that you have to work hard and give it your best effort to succeed. Additionally, I received this idea of innate intelligence or that you're born smart or gifted. And there isn't really any way to become smart. You're just born like this. And although I don't believe this anymore, this was like certainly a message that I received in school. I also want to talk about some of the historical events and historical background that really set up my education. For example, we have the Bilingual Act of 1968, which allowed for bilingual education in California as well as across the states. There was also Plyler versus Doe, which prohibited public schools from denying immigrant children and children of immigrants public education. However, then we have the Boards of Education of Oklahoma City versus Dowell and Freeman versus Pitts, which specifically were about desegregation. They both established this precedent that all schools had to do was a good faith test, meaning as long as they made an effort to desegregate, that was all they really needed to do, even if the districts themselves didn't actually end up desegregating. Some of the other acts of this that I think are relevant are the Educate America Act, which required academic standards. So this is especially relevant because I went to public school. So this really established the idea of like state testing and that our curriculum is based around meeting state standards. There was also Prop 187 of 1994, which was a proposition passed here in California that denied undocumented children or children of undocumented parents right to a public education. And although it was later overturned, it was passed in California. There was also the 1998 Proposition 277, which reversed bilingual education and promoted an English-only instruction. And it wasn't until 2016 that bilingual education was actually reinstated. And this was very relevant for my education because I actually had to classify as an English uh, for English proficiency, even though I have only been educated in English. Because my parents are Spanish-speaking immigrants, I had to prove that I speak English. And this brings me to chapter 6. What was the impact of my K through 12 experiences, and what are some questions that I still have about education as a system? One of the main things that I think was really taught to me through K through 12 was this idea that education is the tool of social mobility. It was really the only avenue open to me for me to move forward or to gain wealth in any sort of capacity. So I think a college education was really always pushed forward to me as the only path available. And one of the questions that I still have in relation to this is specifically about how high schools can encourage or challenge their students more. I think in my high school particularly, their main focus was just getting students to graduate high school. And although that's certainly important, I think there was this idea that students or the majority of their students aren't capable of more. So how can schools challenge their students more, or at least motivate their students to want more? And thank you all for listening. This brings me to the end of my learning story.